Welcome back in, Clay Travis, Buck Sexton Show. Appreciate all of you hanging out with us. We were making fun of the new Snow White, which, by the way, has a marketplace of zero, right? I genuinely don't believe there are any parents out there that have shown the classic Snow White film to their kids and said, oh, you know what? This is a really bad movie. It doesn't uplift women enough. We need a new live-action version. And, oh, by the way, I'm offended by the use of the dwarfs and all this stuff. I'm telling you, this movie's going to bomb. And we're in a world now, Buck. I would just toss out there to everybody listening, where Bud Light may never recover from their decision to turn their back on the average Bud Light drinker and decide to do an ad with a trans influencer surrounding March Madness. Their brand has collapsed. Disney stock, 9 years, hasn't moved. And yet, when you try to come after someone, so conservative boycotts, I would argue, they're working really well. Target, obviously, impacted pretty significantly. Whereas woke boycotts, which is what we saw happen with Jason Aldean, actually are blowing up in the faces of the woke advocates. Because, one, they were never Jason Aldean fans in the first place, right? So it's hard to boycott something that you already hated. So the idea of, oh, I'll never listen to Jason Aldean again. Well, you never listened to Jason Aldean in the first place. So your boycott's really not going to be very effective. You're just drawing more attention to it. And Jason Aldean came out for the first time publicly since this boycott was demanded of his song. And he said this at his Cincinnati concert last night.
Well, I gotta tell you guys, man, it's been a long ass week. It's been a long week, and I've seen a lot of stuff. I've seen a lot of stuff suggesting I'm this, suggesting I'm that. Hey, here's the thing. Here's one thing I feel. I feel like everybody's entitled to their opinion. You can think something all you want to, it doesn't mean it's true, right? So, what I am is a proud American. I'm proud to be from here. I love our country. I want to see it restored to what it once was before all this bullshit started happening to us. I love my country, I love my family, and I will do anything to protect that. I can tell you that right now. But here's what I want to say. A lot of things out there, and one thing I love, you guys know how it is this day and age, cancel culture is a thing. That's something that if people don't like what you say, they try and make sure that they can cancel you, which means try and ruin your life, ruin everything. One thing I saw this week was a bunch of country music fans that could see through a lot of the bullshit, all right?
Pretty powerful, Buck.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an instance where it's all helping his brand. I mean, when you beat the woke mob, when you actually emerge on the other side, relatively or entirely unscathed, I think it is generally helpful for brands. Did you see last week? I'm forgetting the exact specifics, Clay. Maybe you could fill it in. But one of the attacks on him was, oh well, because it really wasn't registering. Because they said, oh well, it like first off, it was they were saying that it was racist, right? That was initially the. And then everyone said, well, hold on a second. There's no mention of race in the song, and there's not even, you see people looting and doing things, but almost all of them have masks on because it was from during COVID. You can't actually see who's doing anything in the videos, really. At least, I mean, not in any meaningful way, right? And then beyond that, so that didn't really work. And then they started to say, oh, but there's a scene in the like, he's in a courthouse and there was a lynching at the, outside the courthouse or something like this. And to this, I want to point out, who knows that from historically, they're basically saying he chose this This was the attack. They're saying that he chose to have to be in this place because it's the site of a lynching. And I just sit here and go, what percentage, if you're making these choices in a music video, what percentage of the public would know that history? I mean, I would honestly argue like one in, I don't even know, 50,000?
Right.
I mean,
or that, and then taking the next step. So this is Columbia, which is just like 20 miles down the road from where I live in Tennessee, right? So first of all, Jason Aldean picked a courthouse that was near where he lives. So to film a music video, which makes sense to most people. He's a family guy. He wants to film something close to home. Why would doing an event at a courthouse in any way endorse something that happened over 100 years ago at the courthouse? Because lots of things have happened hundreds of years where these courthouses have been used. The idea that you're somehow endorsing something that happened before anyone who's listening to the song now was born is laughably absurd.
I'm just going to say, if that's really, if we're going to play their game and say, oh, you know what, this courthouse, this is what it evokes for people, well, then they got to stop having trials there every day, everybody. Think about this. It's a functioning courthouse today, am I right? I mean, it's still
I think
courthouse.
so. I'm looking it up right now to make sure I'm right about this. But Columbia, Tennessee, so you know, Buck, is where James K. Polk was from. That's probably, if you really want to talk about the historical, legitimacy of it. And it's the county seat of Murray County, Tennessee. And I'm trying to see how old this courthouse is. But the courthouse, I mean, I'm right. The James K. Polk home is the biggest attraction. It has had, there have been lynchings there before, but over 100 years ago, basically. So, I mean, again, like,
well,
this
but
is,
my
very
point is
strange.
just, Clay, if it's a place that has that, that brings that thinking into the equation, you'd say, how could you still use this as a courthouse then? You know what I'm saying? If you can't use
I get it totally.
If you're going to say, oh, somebody was standing in front of the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan, and that evokes a terrible injustice that was done 200 years ago, well, we got a problem because you're having trials there every day. You know what I'm saying? So I don't even understand. Did anyone even know this?
1846.
What?
Built in 1846. So, I mean, the courthouse has been in use since 1846. So the courthouse had the Confederate flag that flew over it because, you know why? Tennessee was a Confederate state, right? I mean, the idea that what has happened in or around a courthouse is somehow connected to the events. I mean, you could say, if you want to make that argument, well, BLM protesters outside of the United States Capitol, well, the United States Capitol, they used to have slaves that worked in it.
I was going to say
that
the White House was built with slave labor. It's just it's a historical, it's a stain on our history. Fine, but so does that mean that do we have to start with a new White House? Like, what do you do with this stuff?
Well, I mean, the answer that they're trying to build, Buck, and this is what we talked about, honestly, it all ties in with what Kamala Harris is trying to argue about with Florida, is that the United States history is so stained by racism and evil that it is impossible to consider the United States to be, today, a force for good because it is rooted in such an evil history. I mean, that's the argument that they would try to make, and that is why ultimately I think this woke universe arguments are going to fail, but I just think it's interesting and emblematic to compare Bud Light and Jason Aldean.
But I mean, Jason, does anyone really think that Jason Aldean picked this place that's near his house?
No, of course not.
But the New York Times is writing articles pretending like that's what was behind this.
I know.
Which is just insane. It's just insane. Like, no one really believes this, right? But they write articles. They pretend.
They used that courthouse because it is the closest courthouse to his home that they could film a music video at. That's the answer. I mean, that's the true answer, but this is the world we live in where they try. What I would just say is this demonstrates the failure. What's a success? Here's a good question for you, Buck, as we go to break. And I'm curious if you guys can think of it, 800-282-2882. What is a successful boycott of a brand based on a woke ideology? What brand has been boycotted because they were not woke enough and it has destroyed in some way the value of that brand? Can anyone think of one? Not woke enough. In other words, you aren't left-wing enough and therefore I am not going to support you. Can anyone think of a woke basis of a boycott